welcome to the Wildline Podcast. I'm your host, Dan. This is a podcast about movies and how much money they make at the box office. Today is going to be the normal weekend review show. We are going to talk about the weekend of March 1st through the 3rd, 2019. I will walk through the top 10, and then we will talk maybe a little bit about maybe an awards recap. That would be fun. A lot of surprises. And then we will dive into what's coming out over the next few weeks. So let's take a look at the top 10 for the weekend of March 1st through the 3rd. Coming in at number 1 this weekend was How to Train Your Dragon: The Hidden World, coming in at $30 million, a decent 45% drop. The drop was actually looking more like mid-50s, I think it was 53% on the Saturday deadline update. It looks like the Saturday turned out to be a little bit better than they had planned. So only a 45% drop estimated here for How to Train Your Dragon: The Hidden World, the third and maybe final movie from Universal. Probably not final, let's be honest. Like, these movies are always getting remade. And this one has done quite well. So total gross so far by the end of its second weekend is almost $98 million for How to Train Your Dragon. Budget on this was $129. So it's doing quite well. We talked a lot about this one last weekend. I think that what happened here is, for whatever reason, families and kids and parents weren't super into the new Lego Movie 2, the second part, which has been underperforming pretty significantly over the last month or so. And it sounds like maybe they were waiting for How to Train Your Dragon. I'm not sure why. I don't have a kid. I don't know a lot of people who have kids. So I don't have a lot of good, anecdotal research on this, why How to Train Your Dragon is doing better than Lego Movie. Everything that I've heard from people that I know, that the Lego Movie is going to be fun and awesome and everybody's really hyped, but then it just didn't take off like it probably should have. In terms of how to Train Your Dragon's doing versus the other versions here, at this same point in release, then the 10th day of release, which would be today, Sunday, it's doing pretty even, despite the opening kind of being popping off there a bit. It opened at 57. How to Train Your Dragon 2 did 49, and the original did 43. It had a huge advantage. That advantage is starting to shrink. So right now, 3 is at 97, 2 is at 94 at this point, and number 1 was at 92. So what's happening here is the sequel effect. And this is when we talk about multipliers, we talk about legs. The legs in this movie are not going to be as good as the original. The original was a new concept. It was a very good movie. I saw it opening weekend, and that one spread via word of mouth. So the drops were a lot lower as you got to the second, third, fourth weekend. With the third movie in the series, you know what you're getting. The people who are excited about it went to go see it opening weekend or maybe this weekend, and those drops will be more severe. And what that looks like is, I think the original dropped, I want to say mid-30s, its second weekend. The drops now for the third one are pushing 45% drop. The estimate here was actually in the 50s. I think the second one did about a 50% drop. So that's just sequelitis. It's going to happen. So while this one popped off super well opening weekend, it won't have the same long legs as the second, and especially not the first film. But I think Universal's happy with this performance. The opening weekend was way above what tracking was saying. So even though its legs aren't going to be fantastic, it's still going to make a lot of money. And I think everybody involved is going to be super stoked at this performance. So that was number 1 this weekend, How to Train Your Dragon: The Hidden World, at $30 million. Number 2 is Tyler Perry's A Madea Family Funeral, coming in at $27 million. I think in my official prediction, I predicted about $17 million last weekend for this one. The thing about that, though, is, that's where tracking was. The high end of tracking was $20 million for this. The fact that it's doing 27, and then keep in mind here, it's only open in 2,400 theaters, which is pretty normal for Tyler Perry's movie, but that's not a super saturated wide release opening. Super saturated is 4,000 theaters. So it made $27 million on only 2,400 theaters. The per theater average was over 10K. It was 11K. That's nearly what Boo Madea Halloween was at. So This one's very surprising to me for a lot of reasons, and I'll sort of walk through why. One, what movie is this in the Madea series? I gotta look it up. It's the 9th movie in Tyler Perry's Madea whatever series, narrative universe, cinematic universe. So we've seen these over and over again. Apparently this is the last one I have heard, but because it's doing so well, they're probably going to bring it back, right? So why is this doing so well? What happened? Well, it's not the quality of the movie, I'll tell you that much. Rotten Tomatoes score is at 24% from critics. Let's take a look at the actual critics score. You know what's interesting about this too? There's only 17 reviews counted for this Rotten Tomatoes score, which is very small. Usually you have well over 100 reviews from professional critics. For super wide release, you're talking 150 to 200 reviews. So there's only 17 here. Basically what happened is they didn't have my guess is, I don't know this for sure, but I'm almost certain they didn't have a critics screening for this. If you don't have a critic screening beforehand, they don't have time to write a review. And for a movie like this, they're not going to bother because they know they're going to hate it. And so they're not going to go out of their way to even see it. What's interesting is Rotten Tomatoes. Okay, here we go. They had switched their UI a bit. I thought they had taken away the actual critic score. Right. I feel like I have to go over this every weekend with Rotten Tomatoes, but it has to be said. The Rotten Tomatoes score is the percentage of reviewers or critics who gave it above a 6 out of 10. And so when I say it's a 24% Rotten Tomatoes score, only 24% of critics gave it above 6 out of 10. The actual average score here, numerical score, is about 4.25 out of 10. So about 42% out of 100. So it's a terrible movie according to critics. Now what's interesting, where there's a weird disconnect, the audience score on Rotten Tomatoes is 35%, which is not good. But again, what do we know about the Rotten Tomato audience score? Easily hackable. Although I will say this, Rotten Tomatoes has decided to take away the wanna see score, or they did something with it because of the controversy over Captain Marvel. So maybe Rotten Tomatoes is turning a corner here, where they're gonna sort of button up their scoring and voting so that it's not so easily hacked. I think when they took down the Captain Marvel wanna see score, like 30,000 out of the 40,000 votes were essentially bots. And so at least they admitted that and took it down and said, hey, we're going to fix this and do something different. In any event, sidetrack. Audiences, according to Rotten Tomatoes, hate it. Critics hate it. Obviously, they hate all of his movies. But here's where it gets weird. Cinema score is an A-. Why would the cinema score be an A-? Letterboxd score, which is the film nerd crowd, this is a score out of 5 stars. 2.3 stars out of 5. Not very surprising. That's a very bad score in Letterboxd. But that group of people was never going to like this movie, no matter what it was. But then you have the A- cinema score, and then Deadline has some other metrics here. 4 stars on ComScore Screen Engine's post track, which is good. That's 4 out of 5, with a solid 67% recommend. They would recommend it to somebody else. Why is there a disconnect here? Well, I think it's because the nature of the film itself. So the Madea movies basically kind of has a group of people, a very engaged audience who loves to go see them. Usually it's older African-American females over the age of 25. That's the number one demographic here, and I'll walk the demographics in a second. But I think that group of people, the people who love the Tyler Perry movies, they go to see them for a very specific reason. It's not to see high art. It's to be entertained. It's to laugh. It's to have that side of there's like this wholesome message usually in them as well. And I think that like there's something about that really, for that demographic, it's like a really great experience. And that's why you see that A- cinema score. But anybody who goes into those movies not wanting that exact type of movie doesn't really like it that much. That's why you see the low audience score on Rotten Tomatoes. That's why you see the low score on Letterboxd, 2.3 out of 10. That's why critics hate it, right? So I think that it's the Madea series is such an interesting concept of movie making, because it's almost like targeted demographics. It does not matter what critics say. It does not matter what the average person thinks about the movie, there's a group of people that will go and see these and love them, no matter what. And if you kind of want to, I kind of wanted to quickly walk through, because this could be the last Madea movie that I ever talk about, if it's the last one in the series. So let's do a quick, very quick rundown memory lane. Today my pronunciation is worse than normal. I'm not sure why. In any event, so let's walk through how Madea started. Tyler Perry, I guess Diary of a Mad Black Woman. Does that count as the first one? Box Office Mojo says it does. I guess it does. So that came out in February 2005, only about 14 years ago. That one opened up at 21, closed out at 50. One thing you're noticing here too already, low multipliers. So that means the people who love it go and see it, and then no one else goes to see it. That's what's happening. And that's pretty typical of all of these films. And it goes back to what I was talking about being a very targeted demographic here. Tyler Perry's Medea's Family Reunion. That was a year later in February 2006. That opened up at 30, closed out at 63. Terrible multiplier. But again, these are shot for not a lot of money. Opening at 2030 is huge for a movie like this, especially on the low theater count. They're all low theater counts. Like, there's not one of these movies has opened above 2,500 theaters. That's insane. That it's making that money on opening weekend with that. Hyper engaged, very specific audience, right? Tyler Perry's Madea Goes to Jail, 3-year gap there, came out February 2009. That did $41 million in only 2,000 theaters. And that one closed out at $90 million. That was the best performance of any of these films back in 2009. In April 2011, Tyler Perry's Medea's Big Happy Family opened up at 25, closed out at 53, kind of coming back down to earth. Tyler Perry's Medea's Witness Protection was 2012 in June, opened up at 25, closed out at 65. Kind of what Big Happy Family did, so not really much of a drop there. Then another one a year later, Tyler Perry's A Madea Christmas. That one opened up at 16, closed out at 52. That one had a great multiplier. Why? Holiday movie, right? Opened up on the 13th of December, played well probably all the way through the new year. And then there was a 3-year gap until Boo! A Madea Halloween came out in October 6, 2016. I covered that in this show. I remember that. It was so surprising that per theater average is like 12 something. So that one opened up at $28.5 million, then closed out at $73 million. Then they decided to come back for another one, Tyler Perry's Boo 2 A Madea Halloween. That opened up at 21, but then closed out at $47 million. And so this one, in terms of openings, it's actually right in line with some of the better performers. You're looking at like 20 to 30 is usually what these open at. And you have your like pop-offs like Madea Goes to Jail open up at 41. Family Reunion open up at 30. This one's kind of in that sort of on the upper echelon of performance here. In terms of who goes to see this movie, this is what I find most interesting, and I think it's pretty obvious to anybody who sort of follows these movies. The key demographic here, like I said, was females over 25, African American. And so when you look at the audience breakdowns, and I believe this is from CinemaScore, so this is going to be probably opening night in about 5 to 7 markets, I want to say. And so this is going to be, it might be a little bit skewed. Well, it's definitely skewed, right? It's opening night. So people who go to see Madea the Friday night when it opens, right? So the African American audience for Madea Family Funeral was 59%. So nearly 60% of the people who saw this movie were African American on that night. Where does that stand versus a normal sort of average movie going audience? It's outrageously over-indexed for African Americans. The normal African American proportion of an audience is only 12%, and here it was basically 60%. That's what's happening here. It's such a targeted movie for a specific group of people, and that's why you have the low multipliers, because it pops off. People are super excited. That's why you have the high per theater average, but then it quickly falls off because that group of people have seen it. It doesn't really transcend outside that group. Some of them do, like I think Madea Family, whatever it was, Madea Halloween, the first one, Boo. That one did transcend, and when you saw the audience numbers there, it wasn't so skewed towards African Americans. It was a more evenly split audience in terms of demographics. 16% of the audience was Latino. In terms of that's a little bit lower than a normal movie. Usually it's about 23%. And the big sort of the lower proportion here than normal is Caucasian white folks. Usually they are about 55% of a movie-going audience, and here there are only 15%. So essentially what happened here is like the white and African-American audiences just swapped, right? The African-American audience was like by far the majority here, and the white audience was the minority. And so this is a really good performance for Tyler Perry. I think he's going to be happy with it. I think Lionsgate, who's put out all of his movies, at least these Madea ones, is going to be super stoked by this. There's no real sort of like negative thing to say about this. It's just like a really great performance. The key is going to be that multiplier. Like, how much is it going to make from this opening weekend? I mean, I imagine it's going to have at least a 55% drop next weekend. Maybe not, but because the scores are so low for people outside, I would say, the target demographic. So anything outside cinema score, it's like really bad. And critics absolutely hated it. So I think it's going to have a low multiplier overall. But you never know, though, because, we got Lent starting. Is this going to when is, when is Easter this year? It's super late. In any event, because usually there's during the holidays and Easter, there's movies have longer legs, kind of like around Christmas. I don't know if that's really going to help that much here with Madea Family Funeral, but a really fantastic performance. We'll see where it goes next weekend. I'm excited to watch it. All right, let's keep this train moving along. Number 3 this weekend for March 1st through the 3rd, 2019, Alita Battle Angel with $7 million. This one had an okay drop, a 43% drop. That's respectable, I would say. And it's still in 3,000 theaters. It did lose 700 theaters, so it's starting that sort of descent now out of the multiplex. Per theater average was almost 2,300. Total take so far for Alita Battle Angel is $72 million. Let's take a look at the international on this one really quick, because I'm kind of curious. So it sits at $350 million right now worldwide. That's not going to be enough. It needs to basically... Has it opened in China yet? That is a good question. Let me look and see. It has opened in China. It did 64. I talked about it last week. I should know this. It's done 64 million so far. That seems... I don't know. Yeah, okay. So it's done a lot more in China. So this reporting is pretty behind. So it's got to be a little bit closer to the $400 million mark. You know what? I'm kind of turning the corner on this movie for some reason. Now, again, Chinese market, it's going to do massive there. It already has done massive. It's going to blow out of the water what it's doing domestically here in the States and Canada. But, break even here is, 550 million worldwide. Is it going to get there? Probably not. But they are mitigating their losses here. I do think they're looking at probably $50 to $100 million loss on this. But if it continues to perform well in China, it kind of takes a little bit off that sort of edge. I was thinking this is a John Carter flop. I don't know if it's going to be that level. It doesn't seem like it now. I do need to get updated Chinese numbers on it, though, to really tell. But I think, at the end of the day, it was an experiment, a really expensive experiment. It didn't really work very well. They wanted to do 3 of these movies. They're not going to do 3 of these movies. It just goes to show you how hard it is to launch a new sci-fi sort of story arc or cinematic universe. It's very hard to do. That's why the comic book movies are just constantly being pumped out, because they work and people like them. They understand what they are. And they all interconnect. And so there's the thing about the Marvel Cinematic Universe is it actually, you see the big movies, right? You see the Avengers, Infinity War and stuff like that, opening to $250 million. The expectation, the newer one is going to open to people are saying maybe $300 million opening weekend, which I guess is theoretically possible. The thing about those is like you see those big, huge performances, but like the key to the MCU and to a lesser extent DCEU is how it affects those smaller films. And so, it's the interconnectedness just allows people to go see Thor Ragnarok and know that it's going to like tie into the other movies that they're going to see, like the lesser ones, like Ant-Man and the Wasp. People go and see that because it's MCU, not because it's Paul Rudd being Ant-Man, right? It's just like it's this branding, this collective branding that works so well. And it's very hard to do. MCU was a very long sort of process. And it wasn't easy, and it wasn't always a given that it was going to work, and ended up working. But trying to launch something like that again with a movie like Alita Battle Angel, it just sort of shows you how difficult building something like that is. And I don't think we're going to see another Alita movie, unfortunately, or fortunately, I haven't seen it. So, but an okay performance this weekend, and it seems like it's doing pretty well in China. So every dollar they make is essentially taking away a dollar that they're going to lose. So that was Alita, number 3. Number 4 this weekend was Lego Movie 2, from Warner Brothers, did 6.6 million, dropped a good drop here. This is the drop it should be having, 31%, almost 32% here in its 4th weekend. It has made almost $92 million total right now, at the end of its 4th weekend. Unfortunately, its per theater average is now below the Mendoza line. It is below $2,000 per theater. That's sort of at the point where it gets into that sort of death spiral, and movie theaters are like, get this thing out of here. I need something that's going to make some real cash. Not a good performance for Lego Movie 2. Warner Brothers has to reboot that series, I think. They made mistakes with the side movies. And the long wait in between sequels here. I think that those are the two major problems. But I don't think the Lego Movie cinematic universe is going away. I just think they need to sort of think about it and approach it in a different angle. And I think Warner Brothers will figure that one out and probably put out a movie in a couple of years or maybe 3 years from now. That could probably do really well. I think there's still tons of potential with the Lego Movie stuff, but this one just did not connect with audiences very well. Okay, so that was number 4. Number 5 was Green Book, $4.7 million. This one's sort of getting that Best Picture win jump here. It expanded into 1,400 new theaters this weekend. Per theater average was decently healthy, $1,700 in its 16th weekend of release. Total take so far for Green Book is $75 million. Almost actually $76 million. Do I want to dive into the Oscar stuff right now? I don't want to right now. But needless to say, that's why it's back in the theaters and doing well. It did win Best Picture to a lot of people's surprise. And that's a great performance from Green Book. Just from a financial perspective, it costs $23 million to make, to market and all that kind of stuff. Probably a lot more than that, but I think they're going to make a pretty healthy return. Universal is on Green Book. Number 6 was Fighting With My Family, $4.7 million, a 40% drop. This one, well, I was so certain this thing was going to like break out, but it hasn't. I mean, it's adding theaters. Its per theater average is just not good enough. It's at 1,600 in its 3rd weekend. I don't know. I made a mistake on this one. I definitely made a mistake. I felt like there was something special here with the wrestling angle, with The Rock being in it, with Stephen Merchant directing, MGM putting it out. I felt like there was a good alignment on audience and like tone of film to really break out. It just didn't happen. So it's sitting at $15 million right now. And like maybe it keeps going, but like the barometer here for the health of a movie and its release is that per theater average. And if you're at 1,600 in your 3rd weekend, that's not good. So that's Fighting With My Family, number 6. Number 7 was Isn't It Romantic? Kind of a holdover from the February Valentine's Day holiday. 4.6 million, 34% drop. That's not bad. It has made $40 million so far in its 3rd weekend. Per theater average is about 1,400. It's starting to lose theaters too, so it's definitely on its last leg here in the top 10. But not a bad performance. Now that I'm looking at it, the thing about this whole thing is, you read the 1st or 2nd weekend, you're like, oh, this is what the movie's going to do, and I'm just like parodying myself. But then you look at it like 3 weeks out, 4 weeks out, a month out, and it's sort of like it tells a different story. This one, the story it tells me is like this is a pretty good performance overall. Like, how much more could you expect on a movie like this than $40 million? Now, if it broke out, you're talking 50, 60, 70 million bucks. It didn't really break out. So for a non-breakout performance, 40 million bucks is not that bad. They're gonna break even on this, I would say. So that isn't it. That is Isn't It Romantic? Coming in at number 7 this weekend. Coming in at number 8 this weekend was Greta. This is kind of like a weird arty movie. I said like what, $7 million, $8 million was going to open at. I overestimated its performance. It did open at 4.5 million for the weekend. Only in 2,400 theaters. Per theater average was only $1,900 per theater on its opening weekend. This one is kind of a weird one. Directed by Neil Jordan. He was, hasn't had a hit in a very long time. But he did The Good Thief with Nick Nolte back in 2003. He did Michael Collins' Interview with a Vampire, The Crying Game. If you're a little bit older, you probably know those movies. Those were big movies in the 90s. His biggest movie was Interview with a Vampire, which did $105 million. That's unadjusted back in 1994. It hasn't really had a massive hit since then. The Brave one did okay in 2007. We're 12 years later, hasn't really put out anything massive in terms of movies. With this one, it probably was going to be played as an art film, but just didn't. I don't know why they didn't decide to do that. I think it was acquired for about $4 million. It played at the Toronto Film Festival last September. I don't know what happened here. It's a weird decision to put this one out wide release. Deadline says, they want to recoup their money. Like, that makes sense, but it costs money to market a film for wide release too. And if you acquired it for $4 million, let's say it ends up making, it's at 4.5 now. And we'll just talk about domestic numbers really quick. It's at 4.5 now. It probably will do, it's going to lose a ton of theaters because it's not doing well. So I say baseline probably like $9 million. Let's say 10 to be fair. So that they'll take home $5 million from that. So that will cover the production costs of acquiring the film. So I guess that's maybe why they do it. But like, what about the marketing costs and stuff like that? It costs a ton of movie money to market a movie these days. So I don't know how that's going to play into it. I'm not sure what Focus Features was thinking about this. They knew the quality of the film when they bought it at Toronto. I mean, it should have been pretty clear to them what this was all about. So there's no sort of like buyer's remorse. There can't be. I don't know. It does kind of feel like it should be on a platform release and then maybe sold to streaming to like premiere in like a month or something. I don't know the financials of that, but I don't really get the wide release here. It's just not doing very well. So that was number 8. Number 9 was What Men Want from Paramount. $2.7 million on the weekend. 48% drop. Per theater average is about 1,400, so definitely on its last leg here in its 4th weekend. It has made just shy of $50 million at the box office. This one underperformed, I think. I thought, like, if you compare this to Isn't It Romantic, both came out so the same time frame for that Valentine's Day weekend, or holiday I should say. What Men Want, I thought, had a much better chance of breaking out, and it only did about $9 million more than Isn't It Romantic. I think that's pretty surprising. I think Paramount's probably not very happy with this performance. It's not like a huge loss because it only cost $20 million to make, but there was a lot of marketing cost here. I mean, just like throwing it out there, for a domestic marketing campaign for a wide release, a few years ago it was like $45 million just domestically to market, just marketing. It's changed a bit with social media. Maybe it's gotten cheaper. There's more of a viral effect that you can get from Facebook and Twitter and stuff like that. So maybe those costs aren't so outrageous for a movie like this. But I guarantee you they've spent $30 million to market this thing at least. So they only made $25 million so far when they take half of the box office receipts. So where'd the rest of the money go? So that's why I think Paramount's not very happy with this performance. I think they thought it was going to do significantly better than this. So did I. I thought it was going to push maybe into the $80 to $100 million performance. That did not happen. Number 10 this weekend was Happy Death Day to You. 2.5 million, 48% drop. It now sits at $25 million. I was right about the poor performance of this one. I was kind of waiting to see. I just couldn't believe that it was going to have trouble making 30 million. But it is. I don't even know how it's going to get. I mean, it'd probably make 30 million now I'm looking at it. But like, the drops are okay. It just opened so low and it never came back, essentially. So, not a great performance. A very rare miss from Blumhouse and Universal. I talked at length about what happened there. I think, with a little bit more time sort of thinking about it, I think the issue here with Happy Death Day to You was too soon and didn't feel different enough. There was not a unique hook or engagement to the sequel like you had with the original, and I think that's why people just didn't show up. It's like, do I want more of the same? Well, I already got what I wanted out of the first one. Why do I want more? I think is sort of the mentality of the audience here. Okay, so that's the top 10, folks. That's March 1st through the 3rd. We can talk about Oscar stuff. Do I want to talk about Oscar stuff? I mean, like, maybe very briefly I'll talk about Oscar. I think, the big story from the Oscars and the award season, kind of a recap on the whole thing. That Best Picture winner, when Green Book won the Golden Globes, there was a huge negative reaction to that. There just was. And why is that happening? It's a movie that deals with race in America in a very tumultuous time in our country. And a lot of the criticism basically said it didn't really handle that issue very well. And I think I haven't seen it, but I can kind of tell what type of movie it is. It's one of those movies, it's kind of on what we would call Oscar bait. It's a movie that tackles a difficult subject, and then kind of doesn't really give it the in-depth analysis that subject probably deserves. And so I think Green Book is definitely one of those. It's just sort of, hey, let's talk about something deep, but don't say anything profound when you're doing it. It's kind of the criticism of Green Book. And I was very surprised that it won. Very, very surprised. I thought that Roma or The Favorite had a much better chance of winning. I thought Roma was essentially a shoo-in at that point. But it does sound like, and even this week with Spielberg's comments on Netflix, it kind of seems like there might have been a pretty significant anti-Netflix vote going on, which is why Roma didn't win, and what gave it to Green Book. Again, the reactions for that Best Picture win, not good. I think box office performance, though, and I talked about this movie at length for like the last 3 months, right? So why did it win? It won because it played well with the right group of people, right? The Academy is mostly male, mostly over 50, I believe. So that movie sat really well with that group of people. I think its box office performance helped it tremendously. It didn't break $100 million, but it did very much better than The Favorite of the other sort of front runners. It didn't do as well as like Black Panther or Bohemian Rhapsody, but I don't think either of those really had a chance to win. In terms of the other winners, Rami Malek did win for Bohemian Rhapsody. I think that makes total sense that he was the favorite going in. He had a great speech. Again, what put that one's such an interesting movie that I obviously talked about a lot over the fall and stuff and holiday season. That one was interesting because it overcame this very negative critical backlash when the movie first came out. There was nobody wanted to give that movie a favor. And then you had the Bryan Singer sexual assault allegations and all of that have sort of been plaguing him his entire career. It turns out they're much, much worse in reality than what people are even suggesting. When I forget who put that. I think it was The Atlantic put out the expose or sort of in-depth investigation. It's terrible what he did to people, young people too, children essentially. So it had that baggage with it, but for some reason they love Queen. They thought Rami Malek was a great Freddie Mercury. Critics, just hated this film, and lovers, kind of like people's opinion, people whose opinion I really respect hate this movie and they think it's trash. But it doesn't matter because the Academy loved his performance and they gave him the win here. What else? Olivia Colman won for The Favorite. That was pretty much a given. Glenn Close was probably a close second there. Regina King and If Beale Street Could Talk, that one was kind of a given as well. It's too bad that I think Emma Stone and Rachel Weisz definitely canceled each other out for the favorite on that one. Let's see. Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse won for best animated film. I totally thought Incredibles 2 was going to win that. But Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse proved to be a very, very, in terms of quality, good film, well written, good messaging to it as well. Roma did win cinematography, which they actually did broadcast because that was controversial. They weren't going to broadcast it. I think that's a perfectly great win. I wanted Cold War to win, but like I think Roma is absolutely a worthy choice. What else? Any other big ones? Free Solo one, documentary. I talked about that one a lot in the podcast. Film editing went to Bohemian Rhapsody. I don't even want to start with that. That makes no sense. Best foreign language film, Roma. That one totally aligns with expectations. What are the writing awards? Oh, Shallow won from A Star Is Born. Really the only major award it took home. Now, when that thing came out in October, I think we were all like, oh, this has got Oscar written all over it. And it just could not keep the momentum up. Maybe it opened too early. Because if A Star Is Born had opened in November or December, remember, voting for this takes place in January. So nominations come out like 2 weeks after New Year, and then they vote for like a week, I think, or like maybe 10 days, something like that. I think its October release really hurt it because it couldn't keep up that hype and momentum for like 3-4 months. It just couldn't do it. Best motion, we talked about best picture, obviously. I'm trying to look for the writing awards. Why is this so hard to find? Oh, Bao won for I think that's how you pronounce it, for animated short. Really great short that they put out. Sound editing was Bohemian Rhapsody. Sound mixing was Bohemian Rhapsody. I mean, I don't know, whatever. Visual effects was First Man. Heyo, I love that win. That's a good win. Adapted screenplay was Black Klansman. I thought that was a big surprise to me. Like, I thought if Beale Street, it was kind of an open-ended award, but I could see it going to any of those films. But Black Klansman was a little bit surprising there. Original screenplay went to Green Book, which, man, I just don't get it. Like, the original screenplay nominees, The Favorite is probably an infinitely better script. I know First Reformed is a better script despite the terrible ending. But I think the Academy hates Paul Schrader. Roma was a better script. Even Vice was probably a better script. So that was like the least deserving winner. It's one of those years, if I take a big step back, it's like the Academy, I think, is kind of circling the wagons right now. I think they feel very threatened by Netflix, and they should. They're threatened by Netflix. They're threatened by Amazon. They're threatened by this new distribution method, streaming, that it's only been around for basically 10 years, where movies were being sort of streamed over the internet like they are now, starting with sort of, Netflix doing it. It's only been, about a decade where that became serious, and now it's really threatening how the Academy functions. And that's where we had Spielberg come out this week and basically say he doesn't want any Netflix film to be eligible for Academy Awards. And that set off a whole huge, mess of Twitter wars and all that kind of stuff. My stance on it is kind of like, I see both sides. If you asked me 5 years ago, I'd be like, screw the Academy. The Academy's stupid. I don't care about them. Streaming's the future. They should have awards for streaming and all that kind of stuff. I don't know. After doing this podcast and doing a lot of research into the industry, I think my opinion has shifted a bit. Not necessarily defending what Spielberg said. I think it was kind of a stupid statement. I just think that like there needs to be the rules to be an Academy nominated film. Maybe need to be a little bit, needs to be an update, because technically like Roma counts, right? But Roma didn't really have a normal release. It was in Mexican movie theaters much more than it was in U.S. movie theaters, but that's for best foreign language film that would qualify for. Technically, in order to be to be nominated for best picture, and I think all the awards below that, you only really have to play during the calendar year at a major movie theater. I don't even think there's a number of theaters you have to be in. You just have to be in like I think a couple or a handful. And I think just for like a weekend or two. I think those those rules need to be changed because Netflix is a startup. They're disruptive. They will do the bare minimum to get that nomination, right? Like maybe they say, you've got to play for a good month in more than 10 theaters or something like that. That makes sense to me. Because what's happening, they did it with Beast of No Nation, and I thought that was super disrespectful to the Academy. It is an institution. It's not perfect, but it is an institution that supports art, right? At the end of the day, that's super rare in the world that an institution like that exists. They support movie making, art, and yeah, a lot of people make a lot of money off of it, but that's the institution that is there to make it happen, to make movies happen, to make art, become a reality. And they're there to support that whole endeavor and everything that goes into it. If you think what goes into making a blockbuster film, it's $200 million of hard work that people are putting in. The Academy is there to sort of support that. So I don't really think burning down the Academy makes a whole lot of sense. But I do get the criticisms 100%. Like, it's not a perfect organization. It's way, way overrepresented by old white men, without a doubt. They are trying and have tried for several years to fix that. I remember being in some random, I think it was like a SAG meeting or something. I'm not in SAG, but I know somebody who is. And it was like kind of like a workshop or like an open meeting. They were talking about female representation in like the Producers Guild and the Directors Guild, and it's minuscule. It's absolutely minuscule. But at the same time, they acknowledge that openly and are trying to do things to solve it. And so that's one of the major criticisms. I guess it's like, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Like, the Academy is a flawed institution, but it is an institution that does stand for something and does support movie making. And so I don't side with Netflix here, really, at all. I think Netflix doesn't care. I don't think they give a shit about the process of movie making or creating art. I think they care about money and they care about viewership and basically nothing else. And they said that multiple times, not only in their financial statements, but also in Reed Hastings' interviews. Reed Hastings believes that in the near future, there will be a moment when a movie is released on Netflix and in the movie theater at the same time. And as much as that has been the pipe dream for like the last 20 years in film distribution, it's not going to happen anytime soon. It's just not. If you do that, you basically destroy the entire movie theater industry. And people don't want that. The people do not want the movie theaters to go away. People like going to movies. It's still a $12 billion a year business, just the United States and Canada alone. And it's, it's not growing massively. It's shrinking a bit sometimes, but like, it's still there. And to think that like that's all going to go away because I'm just going to watch it on Netflix like Bird Box, no, I don't think that's going to happen. And I don't, it's one of those things where I think Netflix, who I've always sort of supported and thought was amazing, has kind of turned in the same way that Amazon turned pretty significantly in the last 4 to 5 years. And this always happens with startups. It's just the cycle, and maybe it's the nature of capitalism itself. But someone has a new idea. They're an iconoclastic person. Jeff Bezos wants to sell books from his garage and do it that way. That was like 25 years ago when he started that. And now he's like he's a cartoon villain. And Reed Hastings is quickly becoming the same. Okay, I'll just throw this out there, sort of just something to think about. Does the Academy support unions? And the answer is 100% yes. They may get into fight with unions. They may but they support and represent the unionization of work. Netflix does not at all. Amazon does not at all. And if you need a sort of dividing line, there it is. Netflix wants to dismantle the Academy and its power to take their resources and to make more money. They do not care about making movies. They just don't. And there's some people probably within Netflix who do, but I think the organization as a large is agnostic to art creation. And I think that is where I fall on that. That's a long ass rant and very specific, but you get what you get. So I think that when I'm thinking about the award season and stuff like that, this is a really off year for the Academy. It sucked. The awards sucked. The choices sucked. The nominations sucked. The winners sucked. It was not good. And I think a lot of it has to do with fear. They fear the change in the industry, and they make these really conservative, really bizarre choices for winners. Green Book is probably one of the worst Best Picture winners maybe ever. It was the safest of safe choices. It was just like Oscar bait gruel. It had no place to even be nominated for Best Picture, let alone win. And so I think that it's unfortunate that the Academy is getting scared. And I think that was sort of the result of that here. In any event, okay, let's talk quickly about what's coming out over the next few weeks. The big one is Captain Marvel next weekend. That's like the big one for March, and then Us is on the 22nd. Those are the two big ones I'm watching. How is Captain Marvel going to do? How is it going to do? I have no idea. The pre-sales are like through the roof, but they always say that. And so you never know how much that's actually going to affect what's going to happen at the box office. You know, I think the range here is probably in the 150s. It sounds about right. I don't think it's going to go below 120. I would say 120 to 170 is kind of where I'm thinking about ballpark. My guess is that people are super stoked for it. The troll thing wore against the film because it has a woman in it, which is just... it's so over, and it's so bizarre, and it's so just neo-fascist bullshit. I'm just over it. I don't even want to think about it or talk about it. I don't think that's going to have any effect, and think of anything, it's going to have the reverse effect like it did with Wonder Woman. And so, I don't know. I think it's going to push past 150 now. I'm seeing more like a 160, 163-ish opening is kind of what my gut is saying on that, which would be massive. It's MCU. It'd be a great win for Brie Larson and everybody involved, and it's a good lead into the final Avengers movie. And then where does MCU go? I have no clue. I'm sure they have several movies lined up, obviously Black Panther 2, but it will be a bookend for, I think, what is now an 11-year journey with MCU, starting with Iron Man back in 2008. This really is kind of the end of that era. And I think that they'll still be powerful, and they'll still make a ton of great movies moving forward, but maybe not ever be like this again, because it was a really amazing, magical, special run for Marvel. And it's one, you know, I've never seen before, covering the box office, nothing even close to that. So definitely a unique time period and special moment for them. I think Captain Marvel will play off of that. Us, I think, is going to do fantastic coming on the 22nd. I'm not that stoked for it, but I think everybody else is. It looks cool. I think it's going to have it's Jordan Peele. He's at the top of his game. He's at the top of his hype cycle. Like, this thing's gotta open at least 50 million, right? Like, I would say like 50 to like 70. Maybe it pushes into Halloween territory, like 76 ish. That's possible. I could see it opening at $80 million easily. I think it's a win-win-win for us. Now, does it look great? It looks kind of tired to me. Looks kind of tired. Oh, they're Us. I get it. It's, you know, the whole dual identity. I'm over it. And so I think that, like, I think it's going to do quite well. I don't think my opinion means anything in terms of its box office performance. It might not. I get the sense that it might not have a fantastic multiplier. Like, maybe more closer to a 2 to 3 than like whatever Get Out was, which is like a 5 or 6 or more than that probably. But I'm saying a plus $50 million opening for that one. And then it's kind of like the rest of March is weird. Dumbo is coming out. Wonder Park, 5 Feet Apart on the 15th. That's pretty much very quiet March now that I'm looking at it. No, that's so, you know, as I'm looking at this now, this is super quiet for March. I'm not sure what happened. April really pops off. April has Shazam, Pet Sematary, and Best of Enemies all on the first weekend. And then after Hellboy, Little, Missing Link, all on the 12th. It's kind of bizarre the way they scheduled this out. You would think, I guess people were afraid, and studios were afraid of Captain Marvel is what it comes down to. Which I'm guessing, what did I say? 163? That's my official guess for Captain Marvel is 163. And my official guess right now for Us, I'm gonna say 65 million. for us. So there you go. Thanks for listening, guys. This is the Wildland Podcast. I will be back next week, and take care.